And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of the Assembly Call. As tonight, the Indiana Hoosiers lose to the Purdue Boilermakers at Mackey Arena in West Lafayette, 83-67. Yes, it is yet another IU-Purdue blowout episode of the Assembly Call, as it seems like pretty much every episode we've ever done of the IU-Purdue rivalry has been a blowout. Uh, One of these days, I swear, this game will finish within 10 points. But tonight was not that night, as Purdue took control early. They never relinquished control, and they cruised to the 16-point victory. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. I'm joined by Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips. We are going to break this game down tonight, as we always do. Real quick, I will remind you, go to assemblycall.com/subscribe and get on our email list so that you get our post-game analysis emails, which we only send to subscribers, and they come out the morning after the game. So make sure you get on that. Okay, so let's start the show out like we start out every show with our banner moment, our bottoms line, and Ryan's rant. And Ryan has promised an epic rant, so I'm not going to take too long with my banner moment. Frankly, it's a little bit difficult to find a silver lining or a positive in a 16-point loss to your arch rival. But as it was so many times last year, the banner moment is Yogi Ferrell, who played 39 minutes. He scored 21 points. He didn't have many assists, only 3. But Indiana didn't have many assists as a team, 8, because they just weren't able to make that many field goals. But Yogi scored 21 points. He was 9 of 20 from the field. Didn't shoot particularly well from three-point range. But what I liked about Yogi is that he battled. And when a lot of the guys weren't showing a lot of fight, Yogi was, and it's not a good recipe for this team when he scores 20 points and only one other guy is in double figures, and when he has to play hero ball for certain portions of the game to get his points. We know that's not a recipe for success, but some nights we're reminded that Yogi is far and away the best and most consistent player on this team, and we have a championship-level point guard. I firmly believe that. I think Yogi is that in his junior year, and the question is, will his teammates step up? Tonight, Troy Williams really wasn't able to do that. Some other guys weren't, and the Hoosiers went down. But I thought the effort overall from Yogi was worthy of praise. So we'll start out the show with that, and positive comments may be few and far between after that. So let's go around the horn. Andy, you start, and then we'll go to the main event of Ryan.
Well, I thought because the game is late and I need to do the stats for the aforementioned subscriber email, that I could just pull archived comments that I've made over the course of the season so far and just step away and drink instead of drinking while on the show. But I've opted against that. This is really live. I think it goes back to some of the stuff talked about in the Ohio State game. I mean, this team is so poor defensively that there is no margin for error. And we can talk matchups and all those things, and they're valid. However, this is really 3 straight games where defensively weren't great. Maryland scored well over a point per possession. Ohio State was, terrific offensively, and Purdue was tonight. And while part of that is attributable to the fact that IU doesn't have anybody who could really match up with Hammonds and Haas in the post, I did think the guys that they put in there generally fought as best they could, but there's plenty of other, easy drives to the basket from other guys that had nothing to do with how tall, Hammonds and Haas were. And I think this team has substantial defensive issues, and I think we've seen that so far. And so, the margin for error on Sunday was taken up by the fact that IU couldn't stop turning the ball over, and the margin for error tonight was taken away by the fact that they couldn't make shots. And turnovers were a bit of an issue at the beginning of the game, but they really settled down after that. And I think for me, and we can talk about this more as we go, what maybe you do to try to change this team defensively. I tweeted a couple times about, I just don't know why you wouldn't press. Are you going to give up easy baskets at a higher rate than you're doing in the half court? I would argue you're probably not. And at the very least, maybe you can create a couple turnovers. And they did create a couple late in the game with Purdue. And I know even one of the Purdue accounts tweeted something out you're pressing 4 minutes left down 20 when with 16 minutes left in the game, it was a roughly, 14-point game, and Purdue had a freshman point guard in, and you didn't do it. And so I think defensively, we're 20 games into the season. We pretty much know what this team is and is not. And I think that's what's concerning just because, again, leaves so little margin for error. I think Zach Osterman said something similar after the game on Sunday against Ohio State, and it's a lot to ask of these guys to feel like you can't miss shots, you can't turn the ball over, but that's pretty much where IU's at this point because the defense is poor. Maybe with Perea it gets a little bit better, but some of the issues that we're seeing with inability to stop dribble penetration were things that we saw even when he was around. So we'll see what happens. I mean, that was probably among, other than the things that you guys may talk about, the biggest takeaway for me is that it's just another example of no margin for error, can't have an off-night shooting, can't turn the ball over, and you got to hope to outscore people.
And if you have questions, by the way, tweet them with the hashtag AssemblyCall. You can go to the YouTube page and ask us there. We'll be happy to answer them. Okay, Ryan, you've got the floor. Your time to rant.
Okay, there is a phenomenon that started in the mid to late 90s, and I fully blame Duke coach Mike Krzyzewski for this because he started to realize that he can't coach defense very well, and so one way to get around that is to have your guys lean in and take charges and just stand there in the middle of the lane while someone runs into them and falls over. Now that's kind of caught on, and everybody in the country does it. And tonight IU did it about 12 times when it was completely inappropriate. If there was one example is perfect. At the end of the first half, we allowed whoever it was on Purdue, I don't remember, to go coast to coast in 3.5 seconds and lay it up because Robert Johnson stood at the block with his hands in the air and his feet planted like they were in cement, and the guy went right around him and laid it in. If Johnson decides to actually play defense there and, get into a stance and alter the guy's shot, it's not a basket. We're down, 7 at the half instead of 9 or 10 or 11 or whatever it was. Then you get, on the other end, Nick Zeisloft. He gives up the ball. Then on a breakaway, it's a 2-on-2. Guy's driving right at him, and he just decides to stand there and not actually play defense. The guy goes around him for a layup. If you're a bad defensive team, like Andy just said, and it's clear that Indiana is not a great defensive team, you don't just stand there and wait for somebody to run into you. You play defense. It is the most annoying thing on the planet because these guys give themselves up. If you just stand there, even if a guy's driving right at you, if you stand there, you're making the rest of the team have to work harder. They're cutting, the other guys are cutting and stuff, and your hands aren't ready to deflect passes. You're not ready to adjust. It's the dumbest thing that anybody in basketball does is the attempt to take a charge because it works about 1 in about 8 chances, maybe 10 that it happens. Half the time, if the guy runs into you, they call a block. Half the time, they call a charge. Most of the time, people just go right around you. It's not hard to get around, and it's just one of the dumbest things. And when you combine it with all the other dumb things Indiana did in this game, like constantly driving up against a 7-footer and throwing up weak layups, hey, stop, pump fake, get him in the air and jump into his ass and get a foul. After the first 2 or 3 chances, why are we still doing this? He's 7 feet, has arms from here to friggin' Tucson, and he's just, come on. It's like, how is it that I am sitting here? I played basketball. I know basketball pretty well. But I'm sitting here, and within the first 30 seconds of the game, I said, yeah, we probably shouldn't do that anymore. And he got 8 blocks. James Blackman Jr. is the most guilty of this. I get it. He thinks he's still in high school sometimes and thinks that no matter what he does, he can just drive in and throw a shot up and it'll go in. It's just, you got to work for it. We gave A.J. Hammonds, none of his 8 blocks were difficult tonight. Not a single one was difficult. It just stand there, jump, swat. It's over. And when you're doing that, when you have no defense to stop their post game, and you're essentially giving them possessions by throwing it up to a 7-footer who's waiting for you to do just that, you're gonna lose, and you're gonna lose badly. And we absolutely deserve this loss tonight. There are things about the size differential and things like that. It's a terrible matchup. But guess what? We got our asses handed to us, and we absolutely deserved it.
All right, everybody, final thoughts. Andy Bottoms, over to you first. Ryan, you're right. You're spot on. And I was going to try and go positive here to kind of lead us, play a little devil's advocate, but you got me kind of worked up. And you got me especially fired up about that last part that you were talking about with just the constant shooting into A.J. Hammonds. Like, At what point were we going to recognize that we're driving into the lane and we're 5, 6, 7 inches shorter than him and stop just throwing balls into his arms?
Honestly, it would have been.
When we get to that point, I'll let you know, but we're not there yet, so I can't
Honestly,
answer that question.
I would have rather had us walk down the floor and just roll the ball to A.J. Hammonds and run back on defense. At least we'd be set up defensively. Like, it just...
Okay, so let me... Let's make a constructive point with this, because clearly there's frustration, okay? And so we actually just got a good question about this, so let's use that to lead into this, because it's a valid topic of conversation. So Yasarik asks us, do you think Troy Williams understands that he needs an outside shot? And I tweeted about this, that the film of this game is basically Exhibit A in why it's so important that Troy Williams lock himself in a gym in the offseason and improve his jump shot. Because for all the improvements that Troy's made from his freshman year to his sophomore year, and there have been many, and Troy has played really well at a lot of points tonight, and I thought he did some good things tonight, from a rebounding perspective. He did some good things, but the way Purdue defended him was just sag off, make him drive, and unfortunately when he drove, A.J. Hammonds was in there to reject everything that he put up. And it really showed the limitations of Troy as a player, and it further showed how dependent Indiana is on Troy. It's not a coincidence that Indiana loses by 16, another bad road loss, and Troy only scores 8 points and isn't really able to get going. He's 4 of 12 from the field. And a big part of that was, look, Troy's game is driving, and tonight when he drove, A.J. Hammonds was there, and he didn't really have anything else to do when he got in there, and he really lacked the recognition to stop just throwing the ball into A.J. Hammonds' hands. So, Andy, let's use that as a jumping off point to talk about Troy, because I thought tonight really showed his limitations. For all the improvements he's made, it showed his limitations. And, I don't know if it's a blueprint for how you defend Indiana, because not everybody has 2 7-footers they can stick in there. But certainly we're going to see people just sag off him completely until he shows that he can make a jump shot.
Yeah, I think a thing I saw in some possessions was that it was as if Purdue had Hammonds or Haas guard, responsible for Troy, but really for them that meant I'm just going to stand in the middle of the lane and do that. And I think they didn't do that all the time. Where IU was really successful and where a lot of us, myself included, looked to at the beginning of tonight, it was, well, he's going to have to guard Hartman. They're going to pull him away from the basket. Hartman got in foul trouble early. That didn't help either, but they didn't really even play into that. They just said, look, I'm going to dare this guy to make a jump shot. And I'm sure had Troy even hit the first one that he took, they would have let him make a couple more before they really would have adjusted defensively. I mean, I probably could count on one hand the number of true jump shots that Troy's made this year. And I think to answer the question, I think he absolutely understands he needs to work on that. And, I'm sure it's something that he's done a lot of. He clearly worked a lot on his ball handling over the offseason, and we've seen that pay dividends as well. So I think that's something you'll continue to see him working on. The unfortunate part of that is he's probably not going to develop anything substantial over the course of the remainder of the season, so they've got to work with what they have. And, IU just couldn't do enough to get into the lane. I thought Williams wasn't particularly active off the ball today, which was maybe an area where he could have taken advantage of some of those matchups. Saw Stan do that at least once in the second half, where he had a nice hard cut to the middle at the beginning of the half, and to bring this back full circle, got swatted by Hammonds. But it was at least a play where Troy's got a better chance of finishing over Hammonds than Stan Robinson does, and I think again, to Ryan's point with the shot fakes and things like that, it sounds old school to say that, but there was a play early in the second half where Stan got the ball, didn't really even look to shoot, and Hammonds went flying at him just because he got the ball close to the basket. I think it was pretty easy to do that. They had success doing that with Haas in the first half when he nearly crushed Robert Johnson. So I do think there's got to be a line there at some point. I think the jump shot's really key for Troy. I don't know whether this is the blueprint, because having somebody else sag back may not be able to provide the same rim protection as those guys, but what you will definitely see, regardless of whether the other team puts their center, their power forward or small forward or whoever they want on Troy, is that they're going to dare him to shoot jumpers. And to his credit, he hasn't really taken people up on that too much. I know he's taken kind of like one a game, it feels like, these last couple games, but That's definitely something he's going to see more of and is going to have to find ways to adjust. And whether that's, being able to pull up a little bit sooner. He tried that a little bit in this game where, he stopped short of getting right to the rim, tried to take shots in the lane. Some mixed success there, but he's not a guy, he had a 4 of 12 from the floor. The kinds of shots that he needs to be taking are ones that he should be shooting at least 50 to 60% from the floor on, and so 33% is not going to get it done for him.
All right, so Ryan, there's something that you've been saying for the past couple weeks, and I'm going to give you another chance to rant here because I know that you're ready for it, and that is, when Hunter Mosquera-Perea got hurt, there seemed to be a lack of recognition for how important or substantial of an injury that was, and it was certainly masked by performances like what Indiana had against Maryland, where Indiana's offense was just so good that it masked actually a pretty poor defensive effort, and it seemed like it made people think, oh, we can just reinvent basketball with, this 5-player outside the three-point lineup, like that could work every game. And I think what we've learned in the last couple of games is just how susceptible, just how vulnerable you are without anybody in there who can really provide rim protection. And I know that Hunter Mosquera-Perea comes with all of his faults, and he's so incomplete as a basketball player, and sometimes he doesn't show up, and this, that, and the other, from A to Z, you can talk about all of his faults. But frankly, mid-February can't get here soon enough. I mean, the number one Valentine for IU fans is Hunter Mosquera-Perea, and a game like tonight really highlights it. And look, it's not that having Hunter tonight changes the outcome. I don't think it does. This is still probably a double-digit loss, even if Hunter's there. But it does make a difference. And I've got all these people tweeting me saying he doesn't make a difference. All he is 5 fouls, and he wouldn't do anything. And I just think that's silly, frankly, and a lack of recognition for some of the improvements he has made, and the fact that he provides a unique skill set and athletic ability set from just a size and athletic ability standpoint that no one else can match. And in the short term, Indiana can compensate for that. In the long term, we're starting to show that against better competition we can't, and I know you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I said, people were saying, why don't we just stick with Hartman even when Hunter comes back and things like that. It's like, that's not how basketball works. It's just not. You need to have a post presence. You need to have some size on the interior. If he gives you nothing offensively, it doesn't necessarily matter. All you need is somebody to play defense. When these guys are getting driven by tonight on defense, there was nobody back there to help out, or at least if somebody's back there, the offensive player, if it's a guard even coming in, is not worried because nobody else is going to stand there and block a shot. At least, even if Hunter doesn't get 2 blocks in a game, at least his presence is in the back of the mind of the people driving. He can rebound. I mean, people think that also, a lot of IU fans think that all post players do is rebound. Well, we out-rebounded Purdue tonight and got our asses handed to us. So that's really not it. It's having some level of size. I mean, you've got a 6'6" guy in Hartman who came to IU as a shooting guard or maybe a small forward, and he's playing against a 7-footer on defense. Hunter's 6'8", and he's a post defender. That's what he does. He's not the best post defender in the league or anything like that, but at least he has some competency at doing that. And if you can get him to have 20 minutes in a game and have the other guys cycle in to help out, then you're not relying on Colin Hartman and having him get 2 fouls because he just cannot physically match up. So yeah, people need to understand that some of these guys, regardless of their stat lines, are important for various reasons, and not just blow them off because they haven't been putting up numbers statistically. He's a very important part of this puzzle, especially with guys like Noah Vonleh and Luke Fisher not on the roster when they were expected to be. So, regardless of what you think of him as a player, I had somebody on, I said tonight on Twitter, yeah, if we had Hunter Mosquera-Perea for 15 minutes, it may have changed things in the first half. And somebody tweeted out to me, said no one ever. And I said, no, I'm saying it right now because it's true. And quite frankly, I think the team would very much like to have a 6'8" athletic guy back there to help out in the post right now.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I think that will show itself when Hunter comes back, and hopefully he's fully healthy when he comes back. We'll see. Andy, want to talk with you real quick about James Blackman Jr.'s night because a night like tonight where Yogi was able to get some points, Troy really wasn't able to get himself going, and none of the bench guys were able to have that big 10 or 12-point night off the bench that maybe you needed on a night like tonight, even though I thought Stan played well in the first half. And Zaisov played hard, but he didn't really score, and Emmett battled, but he didn't really score. This was a night where, frankly, we needed James Blackman Jr. to step up and score some points. And, you look at the box score, he had 13 points, but it took him 13 shots to do it. He was 4 of 13, 1 of 5 from downtown. Didn't really do a whole lot else, and frankly just was kind of unimpressive. Purdue played pretty tough defense on him, and I didn't think he necessarily responded to the challenge. I thought, he just not a great night for him. What'd you think overall from James Blackman Jr.?
Yeah, I thought he, really most of those points I feel like came late. I can think of at least 5 to 7 of those that came pretty late in the game, but, I thought he really rushed things early when he did get a chance to take shots and took some off-balance shots, and they weren't anywhere close to going in. And then as he seems to have a knack for doing, took it in. He was a guy that, I'm sure somebody has this charted somewhere, like number of blocks at the rim. He probably leads the country in getting shots rejected at the rim. And on the one hand, you can appreciate the aggressiveness. On the other hand, again, it's like at what point do you pull up and take something? There was one in the first half where he went over a screen and really had a wide open jumper from about the foul line because Hammonds was the guy guarding the screener, and he started to just go back toward the basket and just wait to block the shot. And at some point, you've got to understand how you can combat that and not just drive into the guy. And I know part of that is trying to get him in foul trouble and things like that, but the way that they were handling it wasn't going to get him in foul trouble. Because they weren't being in any way deceptive about what they were trying to do. So I thought he got off to a really slow start, and then I thought that just kind of compounded itself as things went on. And, didn't see a shot drop early, and then felt like he kind of was not really all that into the game, and was a little surprised to see him not come out with the starters for the second half, but thought it was, kind of the right move based on how he had played and hopefully trying to send a message. But I didn't think he played significantly better than when he came back in. And the issue is, as we talked about before, we've seen flashes defensively where he's starting to get it and starting to get better, but those are few and far between at this point. And so he's kind of like the microcosm for the rest of this team. If he's not making a bunch of shots, he's not able to offset where he struggles defensively, and that really showed tonight. And even, this is, well, he had 1 rebound, so hard to be much lower. But, that's an area where he's been consistently involved on the glass. I thought that was even an area tonight where he struggled as well. But, 4 of 13, one of his worst games in a while, and he seems to kind of go through these stretches. It feels like where, he's got this run of good games and then kind of slumps a little bit and comes back. And, so hopefully he'll bounce back. He had this couple good, Illinois, Maryland games, and then, 4 of 12 against Ohio State, 4 of 13 tonight. 2 of 9 and threes in those games, and just 3 rebounds over those 2 games. So I think part of it is him understanding the ways in which he can impact the game that don't involve scoring. And I think right now he feels that the way he can be most valuable to this team is by making a bunch of shots, which is great and certainly necessary based on all the things that we talked about before. But I felt like tonight he wasn't really able to contribute in other ways in a way that he's been able to in other times during the season. So one of his worst games I really felt like overall, and it started out early and just didn't get a good feel for the game. Saw one of the Purdue guys in some of the quotes after the game, so they really tried to be physical with IU early, not let him get into a rhythm, and I thought that was very true for him, where I think they were physical enough when he found an opening, he rushed so much to get a shot that they tended not to be very accurate.
Yeah, and part of the reason why I think he didn't start the second half is that Stan Robinson, who started in place of him, played really well in the first half. And, we've talked enough negative about Stan on here because he hasn't played very well in a lot of games. But I thought in the first half he contributed really positively. There was only one Hoosier who had a positive plus-minus in the first half, and it was Stan at +1. And I know that can sometimes be an incomplete look at how things go in a game, but I thought he, frankly, played the best of any Hoosier, really, in the first half. He was, smart. He didn't turn the ball over once. He didn't take any of those crazy shots, really. 4 points, a couple of assists, a few rebounds. He was even guarding A.J. Hammonds and did so to a decent amount, as much as a guy his size can. So, I thought a nice effort from Stan tonight. So, let me ask you guys this. Let me play devil's advocate here real quick, and you can tell me if I'm crazy or you can tell me if I have a point. But the Ohio State loss, very disappointing. This loss, clearly disappointing, because even though this is the 9th straight Indiana-Purdue game that has been decided by double digits, Jeff Rabjohn's credit to him for tweeting that out. The 9th straight where this game has been decided by double digits or more. That's crazy. I still, I have a hard time feeling like everything is falling. I still think there's some positives happening right now despite these losses, because here's my philosophy. It's that you never judge a Big Ten team by its best home win, because we know that Big Ten crowds can be crazy. Winning on the road is tough, and every Big Ten team is due for 1 or 2 games at home where they're just off the charts, play great, and clearly that's what happened against Maryland. But I also think that you don't judge a Big Ten team by its worst road loss against good teams, right? And so I think you kind of throw that Michigan State loss out. And so when you do that, when you throw out the Maryland loss, when you throw out that Michigan State loss, what are you left with? Well, clearly you're left with these 2 road losses to Ohio State and Purdue. And there's a lot of nits to pick in these games, especially defensively, because Indiana wasn't good and the offense wasn't good enough to make up for it. But these are also not games before the season began that you're really expecting Indiana to win. And frankly, if Indiana makes the NCAA tournament and they have to play Ohio State or Purdue on the road, they're probably going to lose. So, we played them once, we lost. Hopefully we learn from these losses. But I don't know that they're the kind of games that you really get upset about. But the rest of the conference schedule, you still have the 2 road wins against Nebraska and Illinois, which are nothing to sneeze at. Those are venues that we've had a lot of trouble winning in. And then you've got your home wins over Ohio State. So you kind of almost cancel out the road loss. And the win over Penn State. And so as I look at it, still sitting in 5-3 in the big quagmire in the middle, which is where we thought Indiana would be if things went right, I kind of think this team is right where we expected them to be, maybe even a little bit better than we expected them to be. So despite how bad it feels tonight, how bad it felt Sunday, clearly we need a strong rebound performance against Rutgers at home. But I still think, on the whole, the first 8 games of the Big Ten season have been a success. And I still think Hoosiers have shown enough to feel positive about what can happen over the balance of the season. Maybe that's hard to see tonight, but I think it's there. Ryan, I'll go to you first, and then Andy, and you guys can tell me if I'm crazy or if I've got a point.
From the beginning of this season, Indiana is definitely much better off than we thought they'd be. I think there's no question about that. You beat Rutgers, you're 16-6 and 6-3 in the Big Ten. You figure 20 wins in the Big Ten, maybe 21-22, get you into the tournament. So you're right there. You're right where you want to be. That said, I think that those wins at home and on the road kind of readjusted expectations, and maybe unfairly. But beating number 13 Maryland the way we did, that was a whipping we put on a really top-tier team at that point. You win on the road at Illinois in a game that was, this close to turning into a blowout, and then you turn it around and win it. You beat Ohio State, a ranked Ohio State at home. You beat Nebraska on the road. You beat Butler as well. I think that readjusted expectations and maybe too high. But, if you look at these 2 games at the beginning of the season, on the road at Ohio State, on the road at Purdue sporting 2 7-footers, I don't think you pick IU to win. But then after, starting the conference season, what were we, 5-1? You pick them to win maybe both those games. But again, Ohio State was a very winnable game, and it's a matchup that actually I think favored IU. IU just didn't play very well and didn't hit shots. And then against Purdue, it's a game that completely set up to favor Purdue. So, you got to play really well to win that game, and IU didn't. So, I think that we're certainly sitting better than expected, and you beat Rutgers. Like I said, you're 6-3 in the conference and 16-6 overall. You're happy with that because that's far better than you expected at the beginning of the season. That doesn't mean that losses that come up aren't going to be disappointing. If you guys thought tonight was bad, I expect Wisconsin to be just as bad, if not worse, especially in the Kohl Center where they apparently don't foul ever. So we'll see how that turns out.
And Andy, I'll be interested to hear your perspective on this because you've actually been uncharacteristically chipper about Indiana so far this year. Has the last 80 minutes of basketball readjusted your perception at all?
Maybe a little bit. I think what they've really accentuated to me is kind of what I said at the beginning in terms of the margin for error, is that this team has to play not flawlessly offensively, but damn close to really be able to continue to beat good teams. And while I do think, to some of the points that Ryan made, I do think Hunter returning will help some of that. It's not changing the fact that guys can't keep people out of the lane on the perimeter, and that there's seems to be a lot of confusion, what defense we're in, especially in transition and things like that. I do think, he doesn't fix some of those things, and so that's the part where, I don't really know how much that changes over time, but I do think I do think the return of him will help, assuming he's back healthy. But I think for me it has really hammered home just how few things need to go wrong on the offensive end for this team to be in serious trouble, because they, even when they really started to get rolling tonight in the middle of the second half, it was like, well, all they could do was really trade baskets. Maybe you'd make up a couple points here and there, and kind of looking at some of the lineup stuff from the Ohio State game where, I typically do like, well, here's, how it changed between lineup changes. The second half, there wasn't much fluctuation at all. It was pretty even, and that was kind of the same thing. They were playing well offensively, but it almost didn't matter because they couldn't get stops on the other end. So, in that regard, I don't know that, I think that's probably my biggest takeaway from the last couple games. The reality is you sit here at 5-3 and you feel like when you look at the schedule at the beginning of the season, you could have seen 2-6 at this point, 3-5. So you do have to keep some of that in perspective. And the fact that you've got Rutgers and they've only got four road games left. A couple of those are against the top two teams in the conference in Wisconsin and Maryland, and the other are against a couple of the bottom two teams. So you come away being able to win road games at Rutgers and Northwestern. You end up with 4 Big Ten road wins. I think that's about all you can ask for from this team, and hope that you do hold serve for the most part at home, and you end up in a pretty good spot. But the flip side of that is you look at this is a Purdue team that was certainly up for this game. Crowd was more into this game than others, but this is a team that lost at home to North Florida. They lost at home to Gardner-Webb. They had to go to overtime with a huge comeback and a big shot at the end of regulation to win at Penn State. And that lost at Illinois, although I'm not sure whether they had Ravonte Rice. I think they didn't at that point either. So it's not like as great as they look tonight at times offensively. This is a team that's been imminently beatable against good teams and even mediocre teams, so far this season. So, obviously this is a different game. They're going to get out.
I mean, those are teams that aren't Indiana. You're going to get
understood.
Indiana comes in.
I understood, but I'd like to see peak Indiana when they play Purdue, when I'm not having to tweet out things in the second half that it looks like only one guy really cares if what's going on in the game. So, I mean, that kind of goes both ways, especially after the way that IU just got crushed there last year. And I mean, that was, there were plenty. Like I said, I think I said this after the last game. There were plenty of low points last year. I thought that was one of the lowest, just the effort level and things like that. Now, admittedly, a lot of the guys that played tonight weren't on that team, but there is a certain element to that I think is there. So it is fair. I mean, they're not going to get up for Gardner-Webb the same way they're going to get up for IU, but I'd also expect an IU team that's shown a propensity to play to the level of the competition to get up for this game as well.
So, here's the other thing about tonight is that, I thought Purdue was really good defensively. I mean, let's give some credit to them. I mean, I thought they had a good game plan. I thought their guys played hard. I thought they played really well defensively. And I thought something Indiana has been able to do all season is go on big runs offensively. And we went on one kind of run in the second half. But I thought for the most part, due to a combination of Purdue playing good defense and us making bad plays or bad decisions at the wrong time, we weren't able to get on big runs. And just a couple of examples. And I'm not saying that any one of these in particular changes the game if it goes a different way, but in the aggregate, this was just the night it was for Indiana, a team that really needs its offense to go on big runs to make up for the big runs that it's inevitably going to give up on defense. So, for instance, it was 20-8 in the first half. and there's this lineup out there of Yogi, Stan, Nick Zeislov, Max Hotzel, and Emmett Holt. And I tweeted out, what the hell are we doing with this lineup out there, especially at that point in the game? Well, that lineup promptly went on a 4-0 run to shut me up after that, thanks in large part to Stan. And they actually had the ball. It was 20-12. I think Yogi penetrated, kicked it out to Max for a wide-open three, but he doesn't take it. He drives inside. I think he gets fouled. Don't know if he made the free throw, but Purdue ended up going down and scoring. And does Max make the three? I don't know, but he was brought here to make three-pointers. If he makes it, it's 20-15, and we've got the momentum. He doesn't, and things start to fall over. There's another point where it was 34-26 late in the first half, if you'll remember. Purdue had been up 10. We scored. We'd started to wrestle some of the momentum back. And James Blackman Jr. just committed one of the laziest turnovers I've ever seen. Purdue goes down the other end, scores, gets the crowd back into it. They're up 10. Bryson Scott ends up scoring on the final play of the half. That leads to a 10-0 run at the end of the first half and the start of the second half that Indiana was never able to recover from. And so there were these little moments where in other IU games the Hoosiers have been able to make that bucket or make a good play to extend a run that they weren't able to do tonight. And that's been a recipe for success for this team. And, again, credit to Purdue, discredit to Indiana. We just weren't able to make the smart play in each one of those situations, and there were some other ones too. Ryan.
Yeah, those are two freshmen making freshman plays. I mean, if you look at it, and that's the problem with it. You have so many freshmen or young guys who haven't played very much. They make mistakes, especially, and we saw it so much in the Michigan State game. I mean, that was blatantly obvious then. And tonight James Blackman had it. He scored a little in the second half to sort of get himself into double digits and stuff. But this was clearly a game where the moment was way too big for him. And the same thing happened in Michigan State. His shot was way off. He had a couple great looks tonight where he stepped into it and he rushed his shot. It was, same thing we saw at Michigan State, honestly. He just rushed his shot and they wound up way off. And he's got to realize that, the guys you want are the ones whose heartbeat never changes, and he's got to calm the heck down during big games. I mean, that's what we need from him. Now, he was comfortable against Maryland, and he did great, and maybe it was just because it was a home game, but he was clearly rattled tonight, and he was rattled against Michigan State, and at times against Ohio State he played like he wasn't, he was rattled. So you want the guys who are going to, constantly be at the same level all the time, and it's almost like having a closer in baseball. You don't want the guy who celebrates ridiculously after he strikes somebody out. You want the guy who gets the ball back and steps back on the mound and throws another pitch. And I think that Yogi's that guy. Yogi gets fired up and everything, but when he steps into a shot, it's always the same. He may miss, but his delivery is the same. His motions are all the same, and you can rely on him. Now, I mean, I realize that's taken him 3 years to get to this spot, but that's what Blackman should be aiming for. And, for all the buzz he's getting about possibly being a lottery pick this year and things like that, he's got a long way to go, and he's got to work on himself and to not getting defeated by situations more than the opponents.
I don't think there's really any buzz about him being a lottery pick anymore.
Yeah, there is. Maybe not after tonight, but there are people talking to me are saying that he's getting the advice that he might be a lottery pick.
Chad Ford is updating his previous draft boards as we speak to reflect this information.
Round of applause for that joke, Andy. That's good comedy right there. Okay, Andy, you just retweeted something. This is JMV 1070, our buddy JMV. I don't know if he watches the show, but he always speaks highly of us actually on the radio. Not always, but he has a few times. So, big fan of JMV. Says, Crean took exception to Sewer saying Yogi was a lone player to show up. Didn't seem thrilled with it. Andy, since we're going to assume that retweets are endorsements, I'm going to assume you agree with that. And I'm going to... I'm gonna disagree with it, and of course give you a chance to chime in here soon. I mean, I started off obviously saying that Yogi, showed up and was clearly IU's best player tonight, but I definitely don't think he was the only guy. I mean, I thought Stan played focused and with effort, especially in the first half. Didn't do as much in the second half. Even Troy, in the Michigan State game, I thought Troy didn't show up. Tonight, I don't think it's so much that Troy didn't show up. I think it's that he wasn't used to this style of game, and it kind of baffled him. And that's why he only had the 8 points, but he still had 6 boards. He still had 3 steals. He had a block. I mean, I thought Troy's effort was there, but it was one of those games where he's not savvy enough yet to adjust to the game, and it kind of took him out of it. But he showed up. I thought Nick Zeisloft played hard. He didn't always play smart, and he has his defensive limitations, but he played hard. He battled, especially in the second half. So I definitely don't think that Yogi was the only guy to show up, but I think the problem is some of the guys who did show up, this either wasn't the right matchup or they're just not good enough to make enough of a difference when Purdue plays as well as they did and we don't play as well as we did, and when guys like James Blackman Jr. struggle like they did. So I'll give you the floor now to defend your retweet of.
Yeah. Well, it started. He said something about alluding to the fact that Crean had been rude to Don Fisher after the game, which clearly will get everyone's dander up, I'm sure.
Rude to Don Fisher? Oh boy.
But apparently he listened to it again and said it was more directed at Sir. I guess I would say, and I tweeted something similar in the second half that and I would agree with you that some of the other guys played well, but there was a big chunks of the second half when there was a pretty wide gulf between the amount that Yogi cared about this game and the amount other guys did. And that doesn't necessarily mean that those guys didn't play well, but I think guys that IU needed to play well, that's probably a fair statement. So it's great to get those performances from Zeisloft, who I did think, really fought and battled and tried to get rebounds. I think a game like this really showcased some of his defensive limitations, though, is that you really he would get back in transition, and you're like, there's no way he's stopping this guy, which is maybe why he was, tried to take a charge, as Ryan said earlier. I don't know. But, he's a guy, if he's not making shots, it's tough to keep him on the floor for long stretches of time. And I tweeted in the first half that, Stan and Hotzel were the guys that I had felt had played the best at that point. And while that's great for them, and they should feel great, that's a terrible sign for IU. And while it's great to get those performances as kind of like an added bonus, the guys that IU really needed to step up and play tonight, I didn't feel like they did. I do think Troy's was a bit less of an activity level standpoint, but at a certain point, I think there's I don't know if it was Bob Knight or don't mistake movement for progress or activity for progress or something like that. I mean, there's a certain point when you can be as active as you want to be, but if you don't figure out that this guy just swatted you 3 times and you go right back at him, you're not helping a lot either. So probably harsh to say that nobody else showed up, but I think there was Yogi showing up, then there was a pretty wide gap between him and a couple other guys, and then there was a Grand Canyon between those guys and everybody else.
Ryan, how much of a difference does Jeremiah April make if he starts and plays 40 minutes tonight?
Changes everything, Jerod. Completely changes everything. It's a whole different game with that guy in there, especially because he can make a turnaround jumper.
All right, so here's another question real quick. And the question is from, again, Yasarik. Is there any legit big man still on the radar for next year that we have a reasonable shot at?
Yes.
Thomas Bryant apparently is still on the radar. He was named a McDonald's All-American, and we seem to get at least one McDonald's All-American all year, so maybe. And you tweeted out, Ryan, I believe, earlier tonight, Thomas Bryant, if you want to come play 30 minutes on a potential Big Ten title contender, come to Bloomington, because we clearly have a need for someone on the inside.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I don't know really. I mean, I've watched a little video of Thomas Bryant. I don't know everything he brings, but he certainly can't be worse than what happened tonight. So, yeah, come on down, kid.
Hey, but in all fairness to Thomas Bryant's recruitment, his mother seems to want him to go to a place where they really care about their players and academics and do things right. So he should go to Kentucky or Syracuse, clearly, and not Indiana.
Right. No, absolutely. If she wants him to go somewhere, he's gonna, be well taken care of by coaches that really care about him deeply. Then yes, Syracuse and Kentucky are clearly the 2 best options.
All right, we're getting salty. That's always a good sign that we should start to wrap up the show.
I started salty, all right?
Yeah, you did start salty. Okay, so Andy, let's look ahead. And is there any reason that we should fear this Rutgers game on Saturday? And if there is, just lie to me, because I just want to know that we're going to come in and win that game by 15 and have a nice, fun, easy 45-minute show on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, nope, everything's cool. You're fine. Nothing to worry about. I mean, the reality is, so this will be another one of those games when it's a good litmus test for like how terrible this defense really is. And I feel like we've gotten a number of those along the way. But Rutgers is currently 14th out of in the Big Ten, so 14th out of 14, or 14th out of 10 if you just take the name from the league in offensive efficiency. So you would think that IU would be able to handle them pretty effectively. So the only thing that I would say is that this team's defense will potentially allow virtually anyone to stay in a game. But I mean, considering the recent run of games that IU's been on, certainly feels like one that they should, be able to take at least a little bit of a breather in, based on kind of the meat grinder that they've been in so far. The other, I guess, potentially good thing is because of all the snow out east, the Rutgers-Michigan State game got moved from yesterday to tomorrow, so it's a pretty quick turnaround for Rutgers to both travel and play. So if there's any added bonus needed, I guess that's it. But I mean, this is one. If IU really struggles defensively in this game, then we might need to sound the alarm. I'm not sure I'm sounding the Jeff Goodman as of today. I use an NIT team alarm.
Okay, I was just gonna bring this up. Yes, I was going to bring this up.
What an ass.
Ryan, quick question for you. Bracket Matrix ranks all of the bracketologists. Who's ranked number 1 over the past 7 years in correctly predicting the NCAA tournament bracket?
Should be Andy Bottoms.
Our very own Andy Bottoms. So let's go to you, Andy Bottoms. Jeff Goodman, is Indiana an NIT team? Please. Set him straight, Andy, please.
Yeah. I mean, there's a difference in saying as of today and could wind up there.
If we lose
today. Yeah, I mean, as of today, there's no way. I mean, that would suggest that he's not looked at the resumes of some of these other teams. I mean, you could argue. I think I had IU at a 6, maybe I think a 6 in the projections that I put out yesterday, and you could have made the argument that they've got as good a wins as some of the other teams that are even ahead of them. Now they've got the Eastern Washington loss, which Eastern Washington keeps winning. So that's a good sign for IU in that regard, that doesn't end up looking like a bad loss. I mean, I would argue that today's loss, I think from an RPI standpoint, might actually be IU's worst. So suck on that, Purdue. But, I think at this point, to say that they're an NIT team right now is crazy. Now, if they go out and go 0-4 in the road games the rest of the way and they lose a few of these home games, then maybe you've got an argument. So to me, there's a difference between saying, yeah, they're not a lock, which is absolutely true. But there's a pretty big difference between that and being an NIT team as of today, which I would argue is clearly false, unless they have contracted the field of the NCAA tournament since I last looked at things, which I suppose is possible, but seems unlikely at this point.
Yeah, I honestly, if Andy says it's true, I completely accept it because we don't just keep him around for sparkling personality, guys.
No, it's for his expert bracketology, which is always spot on. And I'm not kidding about that. If you haven't read those columns, by the way, assemblycall.com, up in the top, we changed the navigation. There's a link for bracketology. Go there. Andy updates his brackets once a week, and that is true. Bracket Matrix. They rank all of the bracketologists. ESPN's Joe Lunardi was ranked 44th, just for frame of reference. Andy, number 1. So we're hanging a banner here at the assembly call because we're number 1 in brackets. Now let's just hope Indiana's in the final one that you do this year. That'd be progress from last year. I think we've covered all the relevant stuff. Let's go around the horn with picks real quick. And if anybody picks Rutgers, you're off the show forever. So not there's any pressure or anything. Andy, you pick IU.
IU it is. Sounds good there.
I mean, clearly dissent if you want to. No,
but I definitely. Yeah, it's pretty hard to. This is probably the one game the rest of the way that if you look at it, you probably couldn't talk me into IU losing.
Which is nice since it comes before the Wisconsin game, which
you can't talk me into them winning. Yes,
hey,
that's exactly true.
I'm gonna try. Tune into the postgame show on Saturday when I talk Andy into why Indiana will win at Wisconsin. That's just a teaser.
Oh boy, that's gonna get him in. So no, I don't. If they lose to Rutgers, like I said, we're gonna sound the alarm. But at this point, there's no reason to believe that should happen. So if I picked him in a road game against Purdue or even against Ohio State, teams that are more talented and situationally gave me more question marks, and I picked IU anyway, I'm certainly not picking against him at home against Rutgers.
Ryan, just to make it official.
We're beating Rutgers.
Okay,
if we don't, the beginning of this show's rant will be nothing compared to that.
If we don't beat Rutgers, we may just go with silence for 60 minutes. We may just hit start broadcast. We'll all go walk away and just have silence for 60 minutes. That's not going to happen. Okay, we're going to beat Rutgers. Everything's going to be fine. Y'all just relax out there. All right, final thoughts. It's late. Holy crap, it's after midnight Eastern time. Thank you to everybody who's still with us. There's a lot of you down there. I can see that. Remember, assemblycall.com/subscribe. Get on that email list because you get not only the post-game analysis email, but updates when Andy updates his brackets. So that's important. Final thoughts, Andy, Ryan, and then I'll close it out.
I don't really feel like I have too much to say that I haven't said already. I mean, defensively, this was a disaster, and that's becoming a bit commonplace over these last few games. So they've got to find a way to get at least a little bit better, whether that's trying to press, which I attempted to advocate for at various points. Even in a game like tonight, I could have seen myself advocating for the zone, which made me feel a little part of me died inside. But there's a certain point where, like, if Purdue's going to beat you shooting threes, then let them beat you shooting threes, but they're going to hammer you inside. So I was actually surprised we didn't see more zone from IU tonight, which I'm sure that I then would have complained about the number of open threes that Purdue got. But as it stands, that's where I'm at this point. I think defensively it's pretty rough. We need these guys to bounce back because this is trying to get through these next couple games in this stretch will be important. And then you get to a point where you've got 3 out of 4 at home, with Michigan, Minnesota, and Purdue all coming to Bloomington, which all feel like they should be winnable, and then going to Maryland, which will be a tough road game. So I think it's kind of, survive these couple games, take care of business at home against Rutgers, get through the Wisconsin game, and then it's kind of the part of the schedule that we all pointed toward at the beginning of the season where things start to hopefully ease up a little bit, where maybe some of the defensive woes will be a bit less pronounced. But, again, like I said at the beginning, I think, another reminder of how slim the margin for error is on this team offensively, that they have to be elite on the offensive end. And they weren't tonight. Credit goes to Purdue, as you mentioned, for part of that. But some of the shot selection, I think, was similar to turnovers, which they did cut down on compared to the last game. So good bounce back spot. I think the Rutgers game comes at a good time. Hopefully get some guys some confidence back, Blackman and Troy in particular, and we'll go from there. Hopefully Hunter gets healthy. We see some good things from him. But for tonight, this game went about as bad as you could expect it to go, and just put it past you and hopefully fix some of these defensive issues, because that's my biggest fear, is that those don't get better, and then some of the NIT talk becomes a reality. That's kind of the worst case scenario. So hopefully Rutgers rights the ship, puts a good taste back in everybody's mouth, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. Ryan, would you like to chime in?
No, I thought you were just done for the night there.
Well, no, I was just looking at KenPom, and the new ratings are out, so we're now 50th. All good. The new season projection is 11-7, 21-10 in conference. Our defensive rating is now 228th. So I'm thinking maybe a post for between now and Saturday is what was the last NCAA tournament team to make the tournament as an at-large with a defensive rank that was 228th? Because I can't imagine that list is very long.
No. Pretty much echo a lot of what Andy said. I mean, this was just bad. There was a lot of bad. Stop trying to take charges, play some defense. That's one. Since I know all the players watch this. 2, watch a lot of film of the last 2 games and then burn it. Use it as motivation and then get rid of it, because you don't want anything from this game to be accepted except Yogi's effort. That's the only thing from this game that could be taken away, in my opinion, is a positive, and some stretches that Stan Robinson played. That's about it. I think that somebody has to be praying that somebody runs over to Cook Hall and injects Hunter's knee with something to make it better very fast, because we need him on the floor very badly, as was shown tonight. But, yeah, I think that Rutgers comes at a perfect time, and then we'll go to Wisconsin as huge underdogs, regardless of what happens between now and then. And maybe this team plays its best when it's not expected to win, so maybe that'll help. I don't know. But, yeah, tonight was just a waste. And let's hope we can come back strong for Rutgers.
Yeah, tonight was a waste. I mean, just another non-competitive IU-Purdue game. The Boilermakers come back on February 19th to Bloomington. Hopefully, hopefully we can keep the streak going of double-digit wins, and we can give them a little bit of payback. We'll see how that game goes. That could be right around the time when Hunter's back, so maybe we'll get a chance to see how much of a difference he makes, and we know how much of a difference Assembly Hall makes. So we'll see. You look at these KenPom numbers, and right now the offense is 116.9, the defense is 104.2. That's a margin of, 12.7, and, the post I did earlier this season that kind of outlined that differential between your offensive efficiency and your defensive efficiency showed that when you're in that 11 to 12 to 13 range, that's really been a range of teams that are either kind of in that play-in game, kind of just eke their way into the tournament or make the NIT, and even those teams that have made the tournament haven't done very well. So, I want to clarify, the reason we kind of got on Jeff Goodman earlier for saying that Indiana's an NIT team is because when you look at the resumes today, Indiana's clearly a tournament team with what they've done. Now, the problem is, if you just look at their statistical profile, I can see where, someone, if you project forward, you could say, hey, this team needs to get better defensively or they're not going to make the NCAA tournament. And frankly, that's fair if you want to say that. And I think we need to see some improvement from this team. We've talked all year about how, the offense is so good. We can just outscore people. And, you see a game like that Maryland game, and it's like, well, maybe we can do that. But I think these last two games have been a reality check that when we're not at home and when not all the shots are falling and if we're turning it over a little bit more than we like to and if the defense is a little tougher than we're used to and things aren't perfect on offense, this defense is not good enough to keep us in the game. And so at some point the defense has to at least rise to a level of adequacy to allow the offense to truly shine. And we haven't seen that these last two games. Again, I'm going to hold out hope that that's an aberration, that these were two games that we probably were going to lose anyway. And so, you look forward, Indiana should beat Rutgers. We'll probably lose to Wisconsin. We should beat Michigan, although they've played a little bit better lately. We'll probably lose at Maryland. And then you've got that end-of-season stretch, home against Minnesota, home against Purdue, at Rutgers, at Northwestern, home against Iowa, home against Michigan State, where hopefully you can rack up the wins you need to make the NCAA tournament. We'll see. I think, Ryan, like you said, watch the tape of these two games, learn from it, burn it, take care of business against Rutgers, probably take your licks against Wisconsin, and then I think that stretch against Michigan and Maryland is really big. You got to win one of those games. If you can somehow win two, it kind of gets you back ahead of the eight ball. That's been the thing with Indiana this year is they've done a pretty good job, it seems, most of the season of staying kind of one step ahead. These last two games set us back a little bit, but if we can just take care of business over these next four games, I think we'll be okay. And I get the frustration. I get, some of the in-game just kind of being angry at what we're seeing out there. But, remember, know your role. Cheer this team on. Be supportive. I still think this team has shown us enough to have faith in them, to have confidence in them. But the nice thing is it's all proven on the court. So we'll see over these next 3 or 4 games exactly what this team is made of. And I look forward to it, starting with Saturday. Hopefully it's a nice, easy win over Rutgers. Maybe not easy. There's no easy wins in the Big Ten, but hopefully it's not a, last-second come-from-behind, pull-it-out win.
Wait. Rutgers is in the Big Ten?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I had to.
Are we breaking news here? I know. I don't remember that all the time anyway. All right, that's it. That's all I got. It's late. Go to bed. IU loses to Purdue by 16. It is what it is. Let's get back on the winning track on Saturday. assemblycall.com/subscribe. Join us. If you've been listening all the way to the end of the show, thank you. If you're listening on the podcast, thank you. And we will talk to you on Saturday after IU Rutgers. Have a good night, everybody.